Hey everybody, Matt here from Primal Mobility. Today I'm going to be showing you a very simple strength-based mobility superset that you can do that's going to help you improve the function of your spine and how your lower back feels throughout any type of hinging or squatting based movements.
My back! Oh, my back!
Now, I did say that this is going to be a simple mobility superset, but in no way is it easy. It's going to be quite challenging, but it's going to provide you the strength and control within the deep ranges of motion that are necessary to help you feel more resilient when you start loading up your movements in your squats and your deadlifts. So the first exercise we're going to be doing in this superset does require a barbell, but you will be able to get away with any other type of loading like a dumbbell or a kettlebell, but preferably we'll be using a barbell. So the first exercise that we're going to be doing is a barbell Jefferson curl in a Zercher rack position. Now, in a second, I'll explain to you exactly why I really prefer the Zercher rack. There's multiple reasons there. But to start, let's just go through the movement. So keeping our feet at hip width and pointed straight forward, we want to keep soft knees. We're not locking out the knees aggressively. And from here, we're going to start by folding the spine and just letting the barbell comes straight down towards the floor, getting a nice deep stretch through the spine and the hamstrings, and then coming back to the starting position. So as I'm going through this movement, I'm really focusing on segmenting my spine while keeping my core braced. So I'm really moving through each individual vertebrae and letting my spine round quite intensely to really focus on getting some good deep range of motion, but I'm never kind of just slacking through the spine. I'm keeping my core nice and engaged and moving through the range of motion. So as I get deep, I can feel a nice stretch of muscles around my spine. And I'm also getting a nice deep stretch in my calves and my hamstrings as well. So it's a phenomenal exercise for the entire posterior chain to really focus on lengthening and building strength through the lengthening portion of that movement. Now, as I said, we really want to use a barbell for this exercise, but you can get away with using a dumbbell or a kettlebell. All you're going to do is simply hold onto the dumbbell or kettlebell in front of you and perform the movement that way. The only problem with that is that your range of motion may be limited by the floor, so you may have to do this exercise standing up on a box or some kind of elevation like a couple bumper plates. And that leads me to my next point. Before I jump into the second exercise of the superset, I want to quickly explain why I love the Zercher rack for this exercise. Holding the barbell in this racking position is going to allow us to do two main things. Holding the barbell in this position is going to offer me a deficit that holding the bar or loading down here would not provide. As you can see, when I pick up the bar and get it up into this position, I'm basically giving myself an extra foot of range of motion that I can play around with that's going to be able to come from my hamstrings and my spine, as opposed to being limited by where my hands are meeting the floor or needing to stand up on a box or some kind of elevation. It's going to give me that immediate deficit, which is going to allow me to move through deeper range of motion without having to stand on anything. Now, the second reason I love the Zercher rack so much is because it's going to challenge the thoracic spine a little bit more. So as I start to load up this barbell and I come into the top portion of the movement and stand it up, this movement here is going to require more extension and more strength from that thoracic spine area. So it's huge for helping develop strength in that position, which can be really challenging to do with other mobility type movements. It can be very challenging to build strength in thoracic extension. So I find that this racking position for the Jefferson curl is amazing for improving how much weight you can handle while in a front rack position as well. So it's kind of a double bang for your buck situation there. All right, so now let's dive into the second exercise of the superset and build strength in hip flexion. So what we're gonna do, we're going to bring one leg up as close to our chest as possible and give it a hug. If this is a challenging position to get into because you're very limited in your hip mobility, you can do this seated on a bench. So we can get into that deep hug position for one leg and extend our opposite leg out in front of us. Now from here, we can keep a soft knee, but we're gonna wanna get a good contraction in the hip flexor area. So we're going to be engaging and bringing that leg up. The thing I want you to focus on most is getting an engagement from the hip flexor and not so much from the quad. That can be very challenging to do. So one thing that would be helpful in this situation is to bend the knee slightly. If you do that, it'll shut the quad off a little bit and allow you to target that hip flexor a little bit more. So again, getting into this position, extending the leg out in front of you. From here, we're gonna keep a nice tall posture and pull up and hold for a count of 1 and come back down to the starting position. So that would be 1 rep. This can be extremely challenging to do. It looks very simple, but basically we're building strength in a very shortened range of motion, which our hip flexors are generally very, very weak here. So one thing I see very commonly is that people are cramping like crazy in their quads. So again, if you need to, take a step back, sit on the bench and perform the movement from there. So very quick, I'm gonna show you how to do this on the bench. All right, so now that we're elevated sitting on a bench, you can see that my starting position is within less hip flexion than what my seated position was in. Whereas if I was seated, I would be starting from here. On the bench, I'm starting from much lower. So if you are restricted in your hips, you have more range of motion to play around with, and it's going to give you access to basically an easier starting position. So from here, we're gonna perform the movement in a very similar way. However, we're not gonna be hugging the knee to the chest. So now I'm just going to pull up into my maximum range of motion without kind of bending as I go higher and rounding at the spine. We wanna try and keep the legs straight as much as possible and hold for a count of 1 and come back down to starting position. So again, the main thing to consider is as you lift, avoid rounding that spine. That's gonna be stealing range of motion from your hip, and you're really not going to be contracting that area and training it nearly as much. So as I mentioned, this superset is phenomenal for improving the function of our spine. It's gonna allow us to control the position of our pelvis more effectively, which is massive for spinal health. So as always, my friends, if you found this video valuable, please hit the subscribe button and I'll catch you on the next one.